Welcome back to another podcast with Mr. Hagan. On this podcast, we're going to talk about the classical economist. So I said in the previous podcast that there's this great debate in economics over the role of government. Should government be more involved in our lives? Should government be less involved in our lives? And the two in economics, this kind of plays itself out in the great debate between the classical economists and the Keynesian economist, the classical economist. I said on the previous podcast, I had given these as the kind of four eras of kind of the back and forth between Keynesian and classical dominance, and we now want to look at some of the detail of those two positions. So let's go back and look at the classical view. We're going to start with the classical view. And the classical view, I'm going to say it this way. I'm going to say the classical view kind of in a way comes back to the idea of Say's law. Jean-Baptiste Say was this economist from France. And he argued that supply creates its own demand. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into this. You do a whole set of videos just on Say's law, but I just want to say in a very simple way, Say's law, supply creates its own demand, kind of means that if you produce something, then that will generate income for the workers so that they can then buy it. So if you're producing televisions, the very act of producing the television means that you're going to pay some workers. So when you produce the television, you're going to pay workers to produce that television, and then the workers, they're going to take that money and they're going to go buy televisions, buy TVs with the pay that they've received. So the very act of supplying creates income for people to go buy the products. So supply creates its own demand. That's kind of the argument. And as a result of this, the classical view of the world was that there cannot be long-run general over or under production of goods and services. This over-under production of goods and services cannot happen. There cannot be an over or under production of goods and services. Relative to what? Relative to our potential. And remember, and I'll have a note on this here in a few moments, but when I say potential, I mean our potential GDP. I mean when the cyclical rate of unemployment is equal to zero. So we will not produce above our potential or under our potential for very long periods of time. Okay, that won't happen in a classical view of the world. Okay, so therefore there cannot be long-run GDP gaps, as we might have seen on the Keynesian cross in some previous videos. So remember, we were comparing the equilibrium gross domestic product, which we were calling Y1, and we were comparing that to our potential GDP, which is YP, and a GDP gap, or a general over-under production, is when actual GDP is either greater than or less than potential. This is all stuff we've talked about on previous videos. So what the classical economists are saying is, this might happen for a little bit when the actual GDP might be below the potential gross domestic product, but it won't last very long. The economy will be self-correcting. How will it self-correct? It'll self-correct because prices and wages are flexible, and so they will respond to different things in the marketplace, and when they respond to it, when they change prices and wages, that's what will move the actual GDP back to the potential. And so therefore we're kind of arguing that there's no market imperfections, and no, that kind of overstates it, but market perfections are relatively limited. Markets do a good job changing, being flexible, and responding to various different shocks. That's kind of the argument. And so as a result of that, we're going to say the economy is self self-regulating. So here's that note that I said I was going to refer to. Potential GDP is when the cyclical unemployment is equal to zero. That's our potential. That's kind of where we want to be. And what the classical economist is saying is that's where we will be. If we ever deviate from that, if the actual GDP is ever different from the potential, then prices and wages will change in response. The market will work, and the economy will self-regulate and get itself back to its potential. It will self-regulate and get back to its long-run potential. In another podcast, I'll talk about exactly what this process looks like, and then we'll take a look at the Keynesian position, which is going to argue the exact opposite. This has been Mr. Hagan on another podcast. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you on the next podcast.